who is going, well, who's going to be, Dr. Hugh is going to be presenting to us from MiDAS. He's probably the most anticipated event we've had in a long time. We've had a lot of requests and lots of people asking us to have someone from MiDAS talk about all the great things they're doing there. So we're excited about that. Dr. Yu is an experienced data scientist and a machine learning and deep learning engineer with 10 years of expertise. He is very passionate about problem solving through research, data cleaning, and feature engineering and model development. He has a lot of experience with AI, particularly in the space of neuroimaging with an engineering background. And we are very excited to hear him talk about how we can use these AI systems in our regular day-to-day practice and increase our productivity, particularly in the research arena. So with that, I leave you with Dr. Hugh and welcome.
Thank you, Hamid, for your kind introduction. And welcome, everyone. My name is Frank Hu, and I'm a data scientist at MiDAS now. And MiDAS is for Michigan Institute for Data and AI in Society. So as a group, like we support data science and AI applications across campus. So today's session is called From Prompt to Prediction and Leveraging Gen AI and Auto Machine Learning in Clinical Research Data Analysis. So right now we are developing a series of AI in research materials, and we have like one session that focuses on the strategic foundation. And today's session is much more about practical and hands-on stuff. And we're going to explore like how to actually work with your data using AI and machine learning tools. And from when you first start exploring all the way to predictive and modeling. So I want to be clear upfront is that this is not going to be a computer science course. So it's not like very, tech savvy data analysis. And the purpose here is just to show you that the complex data tasks can be done in a new and easier way. So we will use some simple and straightforward examples that maybe you can adapt to your own work right after this. And all right, so let's get started. Um, okay, so let me quickly orient you where we are today. So this work is based on a book, an online book. It's called MiDAS AI in Research Handbook that we're curating now. So if you want to dive deeper after this presentation, and the link is here, excuse me. The link is here right on the right side of the slide. And as a reminder that we are just we are still working on this book. So you may find the content that are updated very often. So the handbook tries to introduce like the AI in research through a 9-phase research life cycle concept, and from problem framing to data analysis, and then finally to output and sharing. So it has two main parts. So part one is about the strategic foundation, like problem framing, literature review, grant preparation, and ethics compliance, etc. And that's about, should I use AI for this? And how do I use AI for this? And then I am going to talk about this part actually later in May for this seminar series. But today we're focusing more on the second part, which is the technical research pipeline. It's mainly focused on data and data science. And that's also where AI can actually accelerate your data work. And we'll look at some practical tools and resources, and especially the ones from the University of Michigan. And here is the key message that I want you to, take away from today is you want to think of AI as your research collaborator, not a replacement. So AI is a tool that can help you work faster and explore more possibilities, but you are still the expert to make decisions. So before we jump into the content, I need to set some context about the tools that we'll be, reviewing or looking at today. So throughout this talk, we will use like several AI chatbots for examples, and you'll see that I will use like Google Gemini, ChatGPT, and Cloud. And then now here is what's important for you as UM researchers. So first is that the university has subscribed to the Google Gemini and Notebook LM. And this is the key that your data won't be shared or used to train the model. And that's the part of the our institutional agreement. And but more importantly is that you can still not use this tool for HIPAA data or protected health information. So for highly sensitive clinical data, you'll need to use the de-identified data sets or like walk through some approved secured computing environments, which we will briefly talk later in the slide. So the second one is that U of M also offers something called UMGPT, and it will give you the access to multiple models in one place. And you can see it on as an example on the screen that when you enter the main phase interface of the UMGPT, and there is a drop-down menu that you can basically switch between different models. And why we want to switch between the models is because that the models have different strengths. And for example, like Cloud maybe excels at coding and writing, and ChatGPT is particularly good at imaging and chart generation, and Gemini is maybe good at reasoning, and it especially integrates well with the Google Workspace, like the Google Sheets or Docs or the slide. And if you are using that, and that's a very convenient part for the Gemini. So all this platform offers models at different capacity levels. That's also something I want to point out here is that usually you got like the options. If you say use like one platform, like say the ChatGPT, and you've got some lightweight models like I think it's called ChatGPT Mini, but here I'm like making an example as also the Google Gemini Flash. And you will have some mid-ranged models like Cloud Sonnet, and you will have like the very powerful models like the ChatGPT Pro or the Gemini Pro. And these are basically the different tiers of the computing power. So usually the pro models and thinking models are for solving more complex tasks, while the simple models are just for, simple maybe web search and information gathering kind of tasks. So, okay. So here is our roadmap for today. And given that we already have some priming context, and we're going to walk through the four key areas with data science with AI. So the first one is about data access and discovery, and it's about like how and where do you find your data. And second is about data preparation and cleaning. So when you get the data, you need to do these to make sure that the data is basically analyzable or you can model based on the data. And the third is about the computing resources, is that when you are ready for the data analysis or modeling task, and you might want to spend a little bit time to figure out like what the hardware or the computing resources that you will need to complete your task in an efficient way. And finally, it's about the analysis and modeling. This is like the core part, and about like where we get into real analysis and the predictive modeling. So these four areas covers the full data science or data analysis technical pipeline, and from the beginning to the end. So let's start with the first part, the data access and discovery. So here is something that you probably experienced, that you need some data to write a competitive proposal to get funding for specific pilot data collection. This sounds a little bit weird, like why I'm needing like pilot data for pilot data collection proposals. But most of the time, and if you want to write competitive proposals, and you have to have some data to start with. But the say, for example, you want to apply for an RO3 or R21, and but the problem is that to finding some public data for this purpose to build like a proof of concept is usually a challenge. Like traditionally, like data sets are like scattered across the different repositories, and you got data in one place or metadata in another place, and the documentations is often like very vague, unclear, and you're not sure like what's in the data, like what variables are included and how they're measured. And you don't know the quality or relevance until you've or like spent like a lot of the time downloading and exploring. And that exploring part is like really time consuming, since I've seen researchers spend weeks to do some data exploratory coding, just trying to figure out like if a particular data set is, even worth using for their studies. But now when we are in the AI age, that maybe we got a great opportunity is that AI can help you discover, evaluate, and access the data much faster. And you can have basically a natural language conversations about what kind of data you need. And you can also quickly assess whether a data set is appropriate for your research questions. And then you can basically navigate these repositories more efficiently by maybe asking AI to help you understand the documentation. So instead of manually doing all these tasks before, and you can basically now ask AI to help you do the same task like much more efficiently. And let me show you what this looks like in practice. So here are some examples of what AI can actually like do for you like while you are searching for the data. It's first you can do intelligent search, and instead of just the keyword matching, the large language model hiding behind the nowadays AI can do semantic search across repositories. So you can ask in plain language like find me some public EHR data for chronic migraine, and then it will understand that what you're actually looking for as a sentence, not just matching the word migraine. And after you get some data sources, you may wonder that I have never seen the data, and how do I know like whether they're useful or not? So for that, you can keep asking AI for data set evaluation. So AI can basically give you the automated quality assessment and relevant even scoring. So you can see here on the right side of the screen, and so the AI is basically creating comparison tables. So not only with the content or the brief introduction of each of the data repository, but it can also tell you about the quality by the scoring, so that you can evaluate whether each data set is good for your research purposes, research questions or not. So instead of you reading through all the documentation manually, so AI can do the summary and the initial filtering for you. And finally, it's about the data understanding. Once you identified a potential data set that might be useful, you don't have to like sort of download the data and code to do the exploratory data analysis. And instead, maybe you can quickly ask AI, for example, like what's actually in the data set and what are the key variables and how do they relate it to each other. And this can maybe help you decide whether it's worth the effort for you later to actually download the data and work with the data to see the details. So for the tools part, and in most cases, and you can use like the large language model based chatbot like ChatGPT, Gemini, or Cloud. And there are also specialized tools like Perplexity, if you have ever heard that. And according to them, that these are like designed specifically for research use. So maybe they have some customized design for research purpose in these tools. But the key here is that you are having now a conversation about your data need instead of just typing the keyword into the search box and then download and then explore the data set by coding. So in addition to use AI to find the data resources publicly, and there are some resources at U of M, and that they're like unique resources that may help your data search. So first, you have access to the ICPSR, which is which is the world's largest social science data archive. And if you are doing any research like related to social behavior or health data, and maybe you want to take a look at that. And the second is that you have the Deep Blue data, and this is hosted by the library. And this is the research data repository that the Michigan researchers share their data set. And it is well curated, so it's a great place to find some local relevant data to your research. And of course, you're welcome to check out the MiDAS in AI in Research Handbook. And we are trying to also curate a useful list for the data finding purposes. And outside the University of Michigan, I want to mention three very useful resources. And the first one is the Google dataset search. And think of it like a Google Scholar, but for dataset. And also there is a Kaggle, which is a data science competition platform, but people upload like all kinds of data sets there, and you can probably find some data sets that's useful for cardiovascular research. And the last one is the Hugging Face data sets. And something is very similar to Kaggle, but the data sets there are like built for more of a high-speed engine purpose, like especially for the large language model or deep learning models, meaning the data there usually are large in volume, and then it's configured in a way that it's easier for feeding to those larger machine learning models or AI models nowadays. So a tip here is that you can use AI to explore those data documentations, because when you open a data set page and you will see like a very long text part about introducing every aspect of the data set, and you can actually use the AI to help you quickly summarize and make it comprehensive, you know, to help you navigate and identify quickly whether this particular data set is relevant for your research. So that's about the resources. And then like now we found our data, and then the next coming part is the data preparation. And here is the reality about the data science that some of you may already know, is that we'll spend 80% of the time that's going into data cleaning and preparation, and only 20% of the time that will go into the actual modeling, the computation, and the analysis. And why is that? Because well, the first is garbage in equals to garbage out. If your data quality is poor, and your results are very likely to be meaningless, and the quality will determine the validity. And then also the reproducibility means like if you get some model that's working, or like some analysis result, and that will depend if other like colleagues or the peer researchers are trying to replicate your result, and it will be very much depending entirely on how well you prepared the data. And if you have your data messy, and then maybe others cannot basically get the same result as you get. And the good news for when we are having AI is that it can dramatically reduce that 80% for data preparation and cleaning. And you have two ways to use AI for that. First, you can let the AI do the work directly, maybe for some simple tasks. You can just upload your data set and ask AI to clean it, transform it, and whatever your need is. But the quick note here is that don't upload the sensitive data to the public AI platform. And the second one is that if you have some coding ability and you can get the code from the AI and run it yourself. And the advantage for this one is that this will give you more control, and maybe you can also customize the code to fulfill your specific need. And it can also help you learn the process of how the data is cleaned and prepared. So here, let me show you a very concrete example. And here is the scenario. And you have a clinical data that there is a column people typed in different city names. And of course, like people will have typos and have capital and the small case letters and abbreviations and etc. And then it's a mess. But you can prompt to AI, say that I have a column of city names entered by users, and there are like different kinds of problems, and help me try to standardize this. And then what can AI do is like basically twofold, as we discussed. Like first, it can directly give you the answer. And like you can see on the upper part of the slide. And you can see that the AI is generating basically a table with all the, Ann Arbor becomes like a standard Ann Arbor name, and Detroit becomes the standard Detroit name. And if you're using Gemini, you can even, save that table directly into a Google Sheet, and you can, either share with the people, your colleagues later, or download it as an Excel. And the second part, like if you say you have a very large data set, and maybe the online AI is like doing this work slowly, and you have some coding abilities, like very minimum coding abilities required here, is that you can ask the AI to provide the code, and then you can sort of execute that code yourself, and then you will get the cleaned data as a result. So as you can see on the bottom part, right side of this slide is like a piece of code that AI generated, and you can then maybe, apply it and modify it according to your own need. And this is the kind of the task that used to take like an hour of a manual work, and now it takes like minutes to finish. So what can AI actually do for data preparation is like first we can do like the data cleaning. As you can see that it's like basically that's only one example, and to correcting the city names, and it can also do for example the numerical data. And the second is about the data transformation, and this includes like format standardization, and like type conversions, and reshape the data. And for example, you can like tell the AI to standardize like the phone number or the date into like a specific format, and the AI will handle that for you. And the third is about the integration, and this is like when you are merging like multiple sources, and AI maybe can help you with the entity names and handling the duplicates. And so like here is a tricky example that, let's say you're merging like two lists of the companies. List A have the Ann Arbor, and list B have the A-A. So how do you know that they're referring to the Ann Arbor city, like the same place. So you can ask AI to provide a fuzzy matching logic to identify like which Ann Arbor and AA matches and which pairs are not. So this is some practicals and everyday problems in research, and the AI can maybe help you solving them like much more efficiently compared with before. Okay, so also I want to mention that in addition to cleaning, AI can also help in feature engineering. So briefly, the feature engineering is something that's creating new variables that better captures the pattern of your data. And sometimes your raw data is not quite in the right form for the machine learning model to reveal what you're looking for. And then the way that AI can help this is that AI can probably suggest some, features that based on your research goal, and it can sort of automate the creation of a interaction terms, and that's when you multiply variables together and see if they work differently in combination. And so here is an example on the right side, and you can tell the GPT, for example, I have a patient age, diagnosis date, and treatment start date, and what features should I create? And then the GPT will suggest you basically a list of possible variables to create. And if you combine this with your own domain knowledge, you can probably form up a strong combination of new variables um, that are like very good fit for your machine learning modeling or data analysis. And this is a simple but strong ways to use AI. And sometimes maybe you'll find the feature AI suggested does not quite fit what you're looking for, but it's not hurting to ask to just get some ideas. So before we move to the next part, and let me give you some do's and don'ts. And these are like based on real mistakes people make. So for do's, is first is document all transformations. Write down what you did. And second is you have to always validate AI suggestions with your domain knowledge. Don't just trust it blindly. And third is to keep your data, raw data untouched. Like always, you want to copy your data and work on that copy. So fourth is like maybe you want to use some version control tools to track your changes to the data and as well as to the code. And I think for the don'ts, it's basically the reverse side of the do's. And but here are the tips that I want to mention is that maybe you want to try the different AI models, and the Chat GPT might give you like a different approach for all these questions than Cloud. And then maybe you want to ask why, and don't just ask AI to do a task, and ask it also to explain why it does it things in this way. And you also want to write specific prompts to AI. And the more specific you are, and the better result you will get. And here is a resource for you that MiDAS is hosting AI Sandbox, in which we invite you to come to our space in person, and our scientists will try all this with you together. So finally, a very important point here is that AI is a powerful tool for data preparation, but you are still the expert and you're making the decisions. Awesome. So we're like shifting gears to the next topic is about the computing resources. And the computing resources are specialized hardwares and systems that can act as the engine for your computation tasks, especially for the AI and machine learning work and data analysis work. So you now have your data found, and before you start running analysis, and you need to ask like your a few questions is like how large is my data set, and how complex is my analysis, and how many iterations will I run, and what's my timeline. So all those questions will decide like what computational resources that you might need. And here is a simple guide for you to think about or to feel about this. It's basically for small scale task, and you may just use your laptop or your desktop. Um, because if you have like say less than 10 gigabyte of the data, or with simple models that you're going to analyze or like run the machine learning, and your laptop is like totally fine for this task. And especially for those laptops or desktops equipped with those graphical um, processing unit, like a GPU. And then for medium scale, you probably want to consider using the cluster computer hosted by U of M, for example, the Great Lakes. And that's the Michigan's high performance computing cluster. And say if you have like 100 gigabyte of the data and you want to run like multiple models, complex models on that, and maybe you want to consider that. And finally, for the if your data is exceeding that range, and maybe locally hosted cluster computer cannot handle it anymore, and you want to go to like some cloud commercial cloud options, and for those, and you can expand as much as you want to process like really large volume of the data and running like very complex models. For example, like you want to pre-train a large language model. But for most of the research project, and you're thinking maybe from the small to the medium range, and you're working with clinical data, survey data, experimental data, and maybe Great Lakes, up to Great Lakes will handle most of what you need. And then how AI can help here is that basically AI can help you estimate, answer the questions. And for example, AI can help you estimate the computational need. And second is like if you have a code and maybe you can ask AI to help you um, to like increase the speed of running your code, like locally or on the clusters. And the third is you can ask AI to estimate the cost that if you are doing like cloud computing, like AWS or even on Great Lakes, AI can help you estimate the cost. And and then AI can also help you troubleshoot the errors in your code. And you can basically paste the error message and ask, why is my job failing on Great Lakes? And AI can often tell you exactly what's wrong and what to do for the next step. So here is a tip that I want to mention is that if you are planning to analyze like a large volume of the data, always test on a small sample first, and don't run your full analysis on your entire data set right away. And try a subset. And that's a lesson that I learned for myself is that I spent like 7 days of neuroimaging data analysis on Great Lakes. And at the end of the seventh day, and I found that I put in a wrong parameter, and basically the 7 days of computational time and resources were wasted. So, I would want like everyone here attending not to having a similar mistake. So always try on a small sample on your local computer first before you shift all the entire analysis onto cluster computing, because you don't have that much of a control when you like ever start the job on the cluster computing. So, and finally, I think it's a slide about walking you through of some of the UM resources. And I've already talked about Great Lakes. It's like a general cluster computing resource. But I want to point out especially the ARMIS HPC and the Lighthouse. So the ARMIS HPC is running by the University of Michigan, especially for HIPAA protected data. And combined with the Turbo Research Storage, also they have a HIPAA storage option that you will be able to sort of run the sensitive data with modeling on that system. And so another thing is the Lighthouse is basically specialized computing environment built by Michigan Medicine. And as I know that they're very good at like employing the new GPU resources. So if you are trying to do some, for example, the EHR data analysis using the large language model, maybe it's also worth considering to go there. And the third one is about the MiDAS resources, and we have the AI sandbox, which I already mentioned. And I also want to mention that we have a consultation service that you're welcome to reach out to us, and then we can, like the scientists at MiDAS will help, like work together with you or your team to like solve the specific research questions or problems on your way. And finally, it's about as Midas, we offer like a lot of workshops and training. And for example, we have like the GenAI tutorial series, and we have like those summer camps for data analysis, data science, and we have biomedical specific uh, 1 week courses, etc. So you're welcome to check those out for on the Midas website. And so you can also take a look at the book, and there is like a specific chapter called Computing Resources in AI Research, and there is the link. So it basically covers a little bit more in detail about what's showing in the slide. And you can also check the ITS website about all these computing resources. But the bottom line is that you have access to a set of computing infrastructure. You are not limited to your laptop, and if your research needed, you're probably gonna want to explore like much more high capacity resources for your computing need. Cool. So now let's go to the core part. It's about the data analysis. And so here is like I've listed a flow chart about different levels of the data analysis. Say we start with baseline analysis, and then this is like a simple, straightforward approach. And this is probably answering your question about like, is there a pattern in my data or is there a signal in my data? And if the answer is yes, and the pattern exists, and then maybe you want to move to advanced analysis, it's like analyzing or asking like, what kind of this pattern and why do they exist? Can I explain them? And how do I use like a say advanced method to find these patterns? And finally is like only if needed, and you will want to move to customized method. And because like sometimes the out of the box method will not fully solve your research questions, and then you may want to modify the model in a customized way to deal with your data need. And the question here is like, how do I make these patterns more obvious or handle some kind of unique aspect of my data? And then we'll go through maybe these steps one by one in a simple way. So first, I want to talk about the baseline analysis and why it matters so much. It's like because the baseline analysis often tested the feasibilities of using a model or machine learning model to to check the feasibility whether your data is a machine learning model. So whether your data is like fit for a machine learning model or a specific kind of statistical model. And maybe the simple answer is that your data fits or doesn't fit, then you can like select the, strategies, analysis strategies like accordingly. And the second is that the baseline analysis usually is established like what a normal looks like, and it will give you like the comparison point for your advanced model later. And finally, is like the baseline analysis will answer your question, research question without complexity. So is I've been like seeing so many researchers jump straight to neural networks, for example, without a linear regression that would, totally solve their problems. And then they're making like the solution to their problem very complex at the first point, and probably they don't need that much complex method to for the problem. So finally, it's like the baseline, like all the things I mentioned about, such as like a baseline model, are required for publications. And the reviewers always wants to know that you try the simple things first, and then it cannot solve the problem, and then you are developing something like in a complex way. So how AI can help with baseline analysis, and it can help like, for example, the exploratory data analysis, and it can tell you like what possible machine learning models can be used, and it can help you with the statistical test selection, and like whether this kind of method is appropriate for your data. And it does assumption checking, and it can provide also a quick visualization to the data or to the result. So here is an example that I want to focus, is that how we can do this, quick checking with the baseline analysis, is that I want to introduce a tool that's called AutoGloon. And it's the first three lines here answers basically what is AutoGloon and why we want to use that and when to use that. So AutoGloon is a tool that developed by the Amazon Cloud Computing Group. And then it can do a quick feasibility test for all kinds of the data that you might want to do a machine learning modeling. And then like the time you want to use it is that you want to sort of check whether it's feasible to apply machine learning modeling on your data. And the tasks that AutoGloon usually do is that it will try multiple algorithms automatically, and finally provide you a result comparison in a table. And we're going to look at this in the next slide. And there is like three chapters about in the online book that tells about the different aspect for AutoGloon tool. And then depending on whether you're focusing on tabular data, focusing on the time series data, and the multimodal data, including text and image. So here I'm trying to give an example about, applying this tool for tabular data, for example. So it's basically you want to do, so when you're doing the traditional approach, and you may be, starting by choosing an algorithm, and then you will decide like one to use, and then you will set the parameters, and then you will train and evaluate and iterate. And this can take a lot of the time, and you can try different things and tuning parameters, etc. But AutoGloon is something that you can prepare your data, and second, you run the tabular predictor, and then the third step is that you directly get a table like on the right side. On the right side of the slide is like comparison of all the existing and popular, models for the tabular data, including, like the regression method, the tree family method, and then also the neural network. for the tabular data, and you get a performance evaluation across all of them. And then for here, it's not only, I'm listing only the accuracy as a metric, but actually the table is much longer and you can see multiple aspects of the different method performance. And then like once you tested that the machine learning method fit your data. And then what you want to do is like an advanced analysis and a customized analysis. So I want to cover these topics very briefly in like the next two slides. And then when you move beyond that the baseline simple testing, and then it's like you want to see your domain specific method, and probably you will need to do some of the, here it's like I'm giving an example of a model assembling that you have like, as I'm from the neuroimaging field, and I'm making the example in that direction is that you collected the data with multiple neuroimaging modalities, and you've tested with the autoglue with the imaging part that is working. And then, but like with autoglue, that you find the default result that gave to you is not fulfilling your standard and it didn't answer like finally your research questions. And then what can I do for in this scenario is that maybe I want to try to integrate those data together with like a specific model for or a neural network or like a model that processes my MRI data and also processes my FNIRS data, PET data, and the structural MRI data and the EEG data. And then I sort of concatenate their results together and I throw them into another simple machine learning model, and which can probably give me a better result if I combine all of this information. So this is something like called model assembling, and which is also considered a sort of advanced technique in machine learning world. And then you will find that when you need this, and maybe it will sort of improve the results, like compared with those baseline analysis, or like if you apply the models like if you apply only one model that sometimes cannot solve your problem. And another layer like deeper is that you want to do some customized method. And here I'm making an example is that for the photoplasmography data, that it's a time series, and usually we'll use like one-dimensional modeling and analysis method to process this data. But most of the time, that is not fulfilling the standard that we required, and it's not achieving a very good result. And what we can do here is that, how about if I convert that one-dimensional time series into some kind of firstly recurrence plot, which is a two-dimensional thing, also reflect some part the information in the data. And then I throw that into a two-dimensional neural network. And then with the model that I sort of combine the one-dimensional neural network and two-dimensional neural network together to give me like a better result. So this this customized method is actually doing a very advanced feature engineering. As you can see that we are actually converting the one-dimensional data into two-dimensional data. And we are then like modifying, like assembling the two models. And then we are probably modifying the output layer of the models to sort of doing a customized solution for this PPG signal. And then this sometimes are needed for in the real research scenario, because the real world data are like really complex. Okay, so that's about like what we're talking here. Is like I want to summarize that is first is the data sets key characteristics, and you can sort of, upload your data and ask AI to describe it. And what are the variables, what are the distributions, and what are the missing values? And the second is like, what relationship should I explore first? And the AI maybe can suggest that. And third is like you can ask the AI to uh, generate like a visualization of your data. And finally is like you can sort of check the assumption for a statistical test or like a machine learning modeling. And the AI can sort of verify whether your data meet that requirements. And the tool you can use here is still like the large language model based chatbot, like the ChatGPT Cloud or Gemini, or like for coding assistance. And there are like the codex from OpenAI or the Cloud Code. And these are like really good tools that can help you do the coding job. And or you can use the assistant like Copilot, and they can like auto complete the code while you are like coding. So which is like also very helpful here. Okay, so finally, here is like the full picture of today's talk. And I want to mention what's important here is that you start from data access and then you go to the computing hardware and data preparation and then the computing and modeling and finally you analyze your result. And then this will lead iteratively to data access again, maybe and you are going to do this process like again and again until you get like satisfied result. So I want to say that this pipeline is never perfectly linear, and then you can use AI to help you sort of make decisions, understand the data, and suggest modeling, etc. So I want to say some of the mistakes here, and which is like you don't want to trust AI blindly, and you don't want to documentation, all the time, and you don't want to, make start from a complex model, and you want to always check your data quality, and you want to sort of while you're doing the analysis, come to consult with MiDAS or attending the office hours or like visit forums like the Kaggle, data science forum to sort of always get new ideas, not just the like from like asking AI to get new ideas. And you also need to sort of communicate with other researchers, and which can, if you combine the AI suggestion and the real person suggestion, and you will find it to be really useful. And then like the for the I will given the time, I will probably skip this one, but the idea you can find the relevant part on the online book. But this idea is that the idea for this slide is that you always want to document everything and use version control tools to help you to sort of keep track of the changes that you made to your data analysis pipeline. And it will be also helpful when you like in the future, you want to share this work with the colleagues and your peer researchers. And here are some resources, and we have all those resources from MiDAS, and you can find some learning resources, and you can come to our places for the research consultation and also trying the models with us within the AI sandbox. And you have infrastructures like for the IDS like computing cluster and also the University of AI tools. So finally is like, thank you, everyone. I know I probably took more time than expected. And then I want to sort of have 5 next steps that you can try after this. And then you're welcome to send me emails, and you're welcome to check the handbook. And also you're welcome to check the MiDAS research page for resources. And so questions.
That was terrific. There's probably, I would say, no better use of time for someone getting started than to like learn how to use these tools properly. So thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. And just to follow up, that there's another session coming up soon that you'll kind of dive a little bit deeper in some of these concepts and some new ones. So with that, I want to open it up for questions.
It looks like there are a couple in the Q&A. The first question is, for a biologist who has no coding training, what do you recommend learning to be ahead of the game or be a better user of AI? I recently joined clinical research, so I would like to create new projects in the future.
So that's a very good question. And the good news is now in the AI era, you probably don't need to spend a lot of time to learn the complex or the deep aspect of the coding itself. And then what I suggest you to start with is probably for example, if you are using Python or you are using R, and you can start with like a very basic Python or R course to at least understanding the basic mechanisms of how to code. Basically, it's like understanding letters for English. And then you can sort of like gradually um, like start learning with AI and then tries to like do your own project with the coding and then while like discussing with the AI and then you'll find that you'll improve your coding ability quickly. And then also I want to mention that nowadays is like probably AI can do the coding job very well. So what you want to do is that you will need to sort of clearly prompt the AI for what your idea or your purpose is, and then get the AI generated code and run it, and then verify the results, and then maybe you can send the feedback to the AI and to tell the AI like which part I think is not right, and then the AI will provide like an updated version of the code, and you can run it again, and then you get an updated result, and finally and you will get the result like converge to what you initially want for that. So I think a summary for this is that you don't really need to have the coding ability today to code, and you need to understand how to code. And I mean, like in a very basic way, and then you can sort of start to code together with AI.
Thanks. And our second question is, can Copilot tools be used on the Great Lakes?
Um, the Copilot tools are something um, so the question is that I'm not the answer is that I'm not 100% sure. And according to my understanding is that Great Lakes, I mean, the notebook on Great Lakes currently does not support Copilot. And what you may want to do is to use your local version of the Visual Studio or the Cursor, depending on like whatever the code editing platform you want. And then you can sort of uh, like edit the code locally and run the code on a small set of the sample locally as well. And then once everything work, and then you can upload the code as well as your entire data set onto Great Lakes and run it from there. So I would not really like do the co-piloting on the Great Lakes because in order to, do a real-time interactively editing, and you will need the um, start some of the virtual computer, which is like consuming your computational credits.
Thank you. That's all the questions that we have. And I know we're coming up on time, but I did want to say thank you so much for your presentation. I learned so much and it was so informative, and I know people are excited to get the recording. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunities. And if everyone have additional questions, you're welcome to, send me an email.
And thank you again, Dr. Wu. It was a wonderful tour de force, really, and we're excited about the next session that you're going to be giving to us very soon. I invite everyone to come back, certainly, and reach out to you with questions. I do want to highlight all the resources that are available at Michigan, and my colleague Ashley has put together on a web site that is in the chat. So please go ahead and use those sites. They're all available to us. There's lots of tools and there's lots of resources and people that can help you if you have questions. So with that, thank you again for spending 1 hour with us, and we're looking forward to the next session.
Thank you so much, Hamid and Ashley. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Bye.